Hello, welcome to Only for Your Ears, and today's episode 25, The Loveliest Rose in the World, which I've renamed as The Restoration of Life. But before I continue, I'd like to give a big thank you to all those people that have made such an effort to drop in and to listen and to view this podcast. Thank you so much. It's very much appreciated. Let's begin, starting off with the summary. Now, I'm going to start off with the summary and then we're going to talk about the most important points in this summary, which I will highlight with little comments that I use to digress a little bit further. And then we're going to move on to my critical review, where I use the sentences that I highlighted in the summary to flesh out a more elaborate examples where I could show you what I really mean using ideas from films or my own life. And then the last but not least, we'll talk about the trigger points where I talk about the points that affected me and may have affected you too. So let's begin. The loveliest rose in the world, which I've renamed as The Restoration of Life. The loveliest rose in the world is Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale that tells the story of a queen on her deathbed. The king is desperate to save her, learns of a legend that says the loveliest rose in the world can cure her illness. I digress. This sounds like the king is searching for the magic elixir to save his beloved wife. Reflection. The power of love. One central theme in this story is the power of love to heal and transform. The queen's recovery is not due to a physical rose, but the love and the sacrifice expressed by the boy or girl, children, and the people in the kingdom. I digress. This rings of a metaphysical tone. This theme emphasizes the idea that love is a force that can overcome obstacles and bring about positive change. The story goes that the loveliest rose carries the power of eternal life and can be found in the garden of a wise old woman. I digress, it's true. The rose does represent the eternal life simply because of its lifespan, can last up to 500 years. The circular shape where there's no beginning or ending, and is a symbol of infinity and everlasting love. I digress. Such power. This rose is so special that it reflects the highest and purest qualities of those who touch it. The king sets off on a journey to find this magical rose, hoping it will save his beloved queen. I digress. The love of his life. Reflection 2. The importance of self sacrifice. The boy or girl's quest to find the loveliest rose in the world demonstrates his or hers, I would say his because they mentioned it was a boy at first, his selflessness and willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. I digress. This is unusual because little boys are considered to be totally selfish and greedy. So I was glad that he was written this way. This is refreshing. The tale teaches that sacrifice and putting others before oneself can lead to meaningful rewards and positive outcomes. In the woman's garden, the old woman's garden, I digress, the king finds 3 roses, a red one symbolizing martyrdom, a white one representing innocence, and a pale pink one embodying love. The king is unsure which rose is the loveliest, so he asks the wise woman for guidance. I digress. I'm glad he asked for guidance from this wise woman which rose to pick. The search for meaning, the boy's journey to find the loveliest rose, is a metaphor for the human search for meaning or purpose. The story suggests that this search can often lead to unexpected discoveries about oneself and the world. I digress. These lonely journeys that we take sometimes in our life often leads to spiritual awakenings and breakthroughs. In the end, the boy or girl learns that the loveliest rose is not a tangible object, but an intangible quality rooted in love. The woman tells the king that the loveliest rose is not in her garden, but is hidden in his own. This is very philosophical right here. It's hidden in its own kingdom. She explains that it can only be found by someone who genuinely loves the queen and has a pure heart. I digress. It's right under his nose. So if his love is truly pure, he will find the perfect rose to heal her. The king returns to the kingdom, searching everywhere for the loveliest rose in the loveliest rose. In the end, he finds it in the heart of a poor boy or girl who loves the queen deeply and prays for her recovery. The boy girl had offered their prayers and tears to a rose, turning it into the loveliest rose in the world. I digress. This is a magical and beautiful moment. Reflection 4. The king takes the rose to the queen, and the magical powers of the rose restores her to health. The story concludes with the lessons that the most beautiful things in life come from love, selflessness, and purity of heart. I digress. The intangible and tangible magical lessons of true love, the importance of self sacrifice, the boy's or girl's quest to find the loveliest rose in the world demonstrates his or her selflessness and willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. The tale teaches us that self sacrifice and putting others before oneself can lead to the meaningful rewards and positive outcomes. I digress. Bravo. What a beautiful story. Now for my critical review on how this tale plays in society today. Now, it's pretty remarkable to imagine in today's society that you would have maybe adults or even children. It's not so difficult to imagine with children, but especially with adults, they could have such an innocent, pure heart. This is such an amazing story about the true magic of how miracles manifest organically from our own faith and persistence. It especially showcases the selflessness and sacrifice the king's love devotion has for his wife. But even more poignant is the power emanating from the innocence and the purity of the boy or girl, with the community standing behind them with all this support to spur him or her on. Love, prayers, and faith being the elixir that energized the rose and restored the queen's health. It took all those these measures, starting from the king, old woman, child, and community, to bring her back from death's door. It's it's a wonderful feeling to know that people genuinely care so much about your welfare that they wouldn't hesitate to hold back in rescuing a life by sharing their help. Sorry to sound so negative, but I know only too often how people will will do hateful things just in just out of selfishness. For example, the old woman could have chosen a flower, prayed over it, and it might have or might not have worked, but she knew her advice was part of the elixir's magic and didn't want to cheat in any way. Unfortunately, in my case, I have found too many nasty, deceitful people that would do anything to see negative outcome to block me and and give one of those hopeless frowns as if to say, I wish I could be more helpful. As I said, sorry to sound so negative. So let's move on to some examples. So the first one is, I digress. This sounds like the king is searching for the magic elixir to save his beloved wife. This reminds me of the pastor of the church I attend, only online now. His wife was diagnosed with a very aggressive form of cancer. He was very upset, of course, and he's extremely protective of her. She also called him her Hesed. Now, Hesed is a Hebrew word for someone that offers love, grace, mercy, and compassion. She gave a powerful example of when she first dropped her husband when she was at university. She went out with three Johns. The first one was, it turned out to be her husband, and then she had two other Johns that she was going out with. For it so happens that soon after about a year after she dropped him, she became really quite ill and she had to have an operation in the pelvic area in the reproductive organs. And it was very, very extensive. When they opened her up, the doctor was a bit shocked at how bad it was. But she cleaned her up beautifully. And she was such a good doctor. And she knew her patient so well. She said, I'm going to save her reproductive organs because I know she's going to want to have children. So she cleaned her up. And the first person that came to visit her was her husband, John, the first John. She was by then going out with the third John. And he was there every day to visit her. Every day to visit her, speaking to her. And she ended up being in hospital for 10 months. He even dropped a job that he had that was too far away from the hospital, and he got a job close to the hospital so he could be by her side and so he could visit her every day. It was amazing. Now, while she was in hospital, her third boyfriend came by to visit her only once, and he was there, and all he did was talk about his new haircut. I mean, can you believe this? He asked her how she was, but then it's like, well, it's about me. And the other boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, wasn't very compassionate either. Well, I think it was around the ninth month. She was still in hospital. She was getting better, and John ordered a pizza. He says, "I'm going to go out and get a pizza." And while he was going out to get the pizza, her father looked at her. He said, "This man loves you, Brandy. He truly loves you. This is an example of true love." Very much like the king. The king would do anything. And this man, John, he would do anything to save Brandy and help Brandy. The good news is that she's recovering from the breast cancer and doing much better. The next example is the importance of self-sacrifice. It demonstrates his selflessness, and willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. This little boy or girl does this. The tale teaches that self-sacrifice and putting others before oneself can lead to meaningful rewards and positive outcome. I digress. Bravo. Now, I'm drawn to the story of in the film with Michael Orr, the football player, and it's called Blindside. So, 70-year-old Michael, Big Mike Orr, has been in foster care with different families in Tennessee due to his biological mother's drug addiction. But every time he is placed in a new home, he runs back to her. His friend's father, on whose couch Michael Michael couch on whose couch Michael has been sleeping, asked Bert Cotton, the football coach of Wingate Christian Church School, to help get his son and Michael enrolled. Impressed by Mike's size and athleticism, Cotton gets him admitted despite his poor academic record. Michael is befriended by a younger student named Sean. Sean Tui turns out to be his brother in real life and in the movie. SJ's mother, Leanne, is a strong-minded interior designer and the wife of a wealthy businessman, Sean Sr. Mike's poor academic grades is what I want to discuss. At the beginning of the film, teachers discover that Mike has 98 protective instincts, which is very similar to what John had with the first example I gave. He doesn't have 98% protective instincts, but his protective instincts towards his wife is really, really high. Close to not exactly like John, not exactly like him, because pastors are very academic, but those instincts are critical to him. Becoming a football star and completing his paper, which he passes and impresses the teacher. The reason why I want to talk about this is because the teacher basically doesn't have any faith in him at all. This one particular teacher. The other teachers really try to encourage him and say, look, I know you can do this. You're not stupid. I know you have a lot of potential. And, they encourage him. And then towards at the very end, when it comes to writing his essay, his father picking up that he has these incredible protective instincts, I think he uses a story a bit like Spartacus, but it's not exactly the same as Spartacus, but it's similar. And he said, why don't you write something about that? He says, they're all going to die, aren't they? And he says, well, yeah. And he sees the look on Big Mike's face and he realizes Mike has found an essay that he can really express himself in and have that one last final shot so he can pass his exams. And of course he does, because the teacher is so taken by how much he's grown and how much of himself he put in the essay. He can't help but pass him. So, you know, sacrifice, selflessness, and the willingness to work hard is what I'm trying to show in this second example in my critical review. The third one is, I digress, such power. The rose is so special that it reflects the highest, purest qualities of those who touch it. The king sets off on a journey to find this magical rose, hoping it will save his beloved queen. This reminds me of the film The Horse Whisperer with Robert Redford. It's about a girl who loses her left leg in a freak accident. The girl is out riding with a friend in a snow-filled mountain area, and a snow truck swerves and the horses get startled. Her friend gets destroyed by the truck and dies, but the horse, Pilgrim, survives with a trauma wound, and Grace receives a partial amputation to her left leg and is left bitter and withdrawn after the accident. Meanwhile, Pilgrim, her horse, is traumatized. Oh, yes, I must remember both the girl and the horse, her friend, they both die. And Pilgrim is uncontrollable to the extent that it suggested that he be put down. Grace's mother, Annie, a strong-minded workaholic and magazine editor, refuses to allow it, sensing that somehow Grace's recovery is linked with Pilgrim's recovery too. Despite desperate for a way to heal both Grace and Pilgrim, Annie, the mother, tracks down a horse whisperer. Now, this horse whisperer is similar to the the wise old woman in the story. The wise old woman that knows her stuff. Tom Booker in the remote Montana mountains. Tom agrees to help, but only if Grace also takes part in the process. Grace reluctantly agrees, and she and Annie go to stay at Booker's ranch, where Tom lives with his brother and his brother's family. Tom convinces Grace. Pilgrim was so traumatized by the accident, he put his life on the line and took the impact of the blades on the side of his chest to save Grace. His devotion and love for her matches the king's. He would die just to save her. And this is why the poor horse was so traumatized. He just, he was just so hurt. And his love for, for his owner was so important. And he saw that he was close to death himself while as he protected Grace. So this is the type of self-sacrifice and devotion and commitment and selflessness that the king showed, like this actual horse showed for his owner. So let's move on to the trigger points. Now, there are such things as positive trigger points. It doesn't always have to be negative. And I couldn't find anything negative about this. So I have some positive trigger points, which I'm really glad to report. Okay, so let's take a look at it. I digress. Number one, the tangible and intangible magical lessons of true love. Now, I want to share a story about a couple that I sort of grew up with when I was in England. Our family grew up with Mr. and Mrs. Farr, both from Jamaica, came over, immigrated to England, had 3 children. Now, Mr. Farr was quite an ambitious man. He had a printing company and he did very, very well. But unfortunately, he got caught up in tax fraud and, you know, some not such good things, as a lot to do with government money. And he ended up going to prison. But he went to prison about 2 or 3 times, actually. It wasn't just once. And Angela was left by herself with these 3 children. Now, the 3 children have turned out to be very well adjusted, beautiful, well, middle-aged women now. But just to show how much she loved her husband, who was committed to him, who visited him in prison, he looked after those children, he made sure that the company continued to run as smoothly as it possibly could. Under the 3 times he went to jail 3 times. They stayed together. They're still together. They've moved back to the West Indies. I think he's a preacher. He is very, you know, I think he was always quite religious, but he became even more religious, you know, being in prison. And it's quite a remarkable story. They never divorced. He never, I don't know if he was unfaithful. I don't think he was unfaithful. I think they truly, honestly loved each other. And it was night and day in comparison to what I grew up with my parents. And to this day, they're still together. They've been together for about almost 50 years. And let me tell you something. There's nothing that she wouldn't do for him, and there's nothing that he wouldn't do for her. And as much as it made me sad to see that my parents could not hold it together, I am equally proud to be a witness, a life witness, to see this couple make it and their children do so well. That's the first trigger, or what you want to call a trigger. The second one is the woman tells the king that the loveliest rose is not in her garden, but is hidden in his own kingdom. She explains, she explains can only be found by someone who genuinely loves the queen and has a pure heart. I digress. It's right under his nose. So if his love is truly pure, he will find the perfect rose to heal her. This reminds me of when someone is looking for their life partner and they can't see the forest for the trees. Though the couple can't see the forest for the trees. This reminds me of David Beckham and Victoria Beckham. The couple, in actual fact, grew up right under each other's noses. They only lived 15 minutes away from each other. They didn't actually meet until years later, when Victoria was a posh spice of the Spice Girls and David was playing with Manchester City. David recounted the meeting on the Ellen DeGeneres show. He came to a football match or a soccer match. David and Victoria Beckham started dating a couple of matches later, and they have been one of the longest, what you call Hollywood transatlantic marriages in a very long time. And much like the epic romance, the story of how they met is just as sweet. David first had eyes on the former Spice Girl when she was at a hotel with his best friend. He remembers turning around before I even met Victoria and said, I want to marry that one. The one in the black dress, the one with the bob. A few weeks later, Victoria was hanging out at David's soccer match and he said hi from across the room, even though David believed he had missed his opportunity to ask her out. A week later, Victoria popped up at another match. Now, the story goes, they had this eye to eye contact game going on for a couple of weeks. And then one day she just walked up to him and she said, if we're going to just stand here looking at each other, couldn't you at least ask me my name and buy me a drink? And the rest is history. But these two people were 15 minutes away from each other. They didn't really know each other, but they were like two ships in the night passing each other by. And then at the right time, when she became famous and he became famous at the very beginning of their fame, that's when the lights turned on and they connected. And I have to admit, they have 5 children. They have 5 children, and Victoria knows that she's married to a very charismatic man. She knows that he's probably had a couple of women, and it doesn't matter because of the foundation of their marriage is rooted in love. It's not rooted in, sexual appetites. It's rooted in love. And yes, the sex and everything else comes after that. But they have 5 children, 4 boys and 1 girl. So that really impresses me. Who would have thought You know, if you had asked me 20 years ago, do you think that these two are going to make it? I would have just said, well, you know, I can't see that happening. I'm so glad I didn't voice an opinion. Now, the third one, I digress. Such power. This rose is so special that it reflects the highest, the purest qualities of those who touch it. The king sets off on a journey and finds this magical rose, hoping it will save his beloved queen. This is such a beautiful gesture from the wise old woman. She tells the king to look for the rose in his garden. What she's really saying is that there's a well of wisdom contained within the king that he hasn't tapped into yet. I'm reminded of the early days of the pandemic when I didn't have a support system to help me. In fact, I never really have had a support system. I've always been like a one-man band. Now and again, I've had people that help me. But in general, people have always felt, well, you can do it yourself. And so I've ended up having to do it myself. And I must say today, I can say I'm happy that I've learned quite a few skills along the way. You see, people have always avoided me like the plague if I asked for help. But if people needed me, they'd trot on over to me and just be all wishy washy and tearful with this and that. I must admit, I really felt frustrated. But I now realize the universe was pushing me into using my well of intuition, wisdom, and resourcefulness that has come in so handy living here in Vancouver. I can't tell you. I've been able to, and people have been in such shock and awe because they said, Melody, it's amazing how you've been so resourceful here in the city. And that's all due to the fact that I did not have a support system. I just had to muddle through by myself. So resourcefulness to be a powerful witness and example to myself. How, but now I'd like to talk about the shelter that I've been staying at because I'm basically homeless and I was evicted a year ago from my apartment in Barcelona. And I left Barcelona very quickly. I had a ticket to come to Vancouver, and so I did. And I decided to see if I could do something here. And I must admit, I've done quite a lot. My counselor has been amazed. She says, you've survived in the worst part of North America. And not only survived, but you've thrived. It's amazing. She's still in shock. But it came to a point where I wasn't able to gather up funds, no matter what I tried to do. If I tried GoFundMe or if I tried to get work, I wasn't able to gather up the funds to be able to stay. So the shelter that I'm staying at decided to, help me. And they said, look, Melody, it doesn't look as though it's going to work out for you here in Vancouver. And they started brainstorming. And within a couple of 1 or 2 weeks, they said, look, we're going to help you. We're going to help you get back to Spain. And they have been so helpful. I am in awe of how people have come together around me to support me in as many ways possible. I've never had this type of support, even when I had breast cancer. I've never had this support before, and it was a shock to my system. But I now realize why I didn't get things easy the way a lot of people get things easy when it comes to support. God wanted to show me, okay, let's see what you can do by yourself. And if you really need the support, people will be there for you. And this is what I've been able to bear witness to, people being there for me just when I really need it. And I really, really needed it. I didn't realize how tired I was, but I really needed it. And I really appreciate the universe and God and these women that have come together to help me. So that's the third trigger, the capacity to be able to dig into who you are as a person, your wisdom, your intuition, self-love, healing, all of these things to make it possible to be resourceful and helpful to yourself. And when you really need that help, somebody's there for you. And God showed up. So I just want to finish off today and say thank you very much once again and leave you with the typical expression: healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong lesson, blessing, and gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. I'd also like to, once again, thank you so much for dropping in and sharing, listening, I should say, sharing your time to come in and listen. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to share and subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything, or give me a thumbs up. Really appreciate it. Okay. Until next time. Bye bye.